My Believe in Broncos podcast is presented by my friends at Superbook Sports. And now the world famous Superbook Sports is coming to the Lodge Casino in Blackhawk. Soon you can get right into the heart of the action. Join them Friday, June 25th for the grand opening of the Superbook at the Lodge Casino. Catch all the games on their state-of-the-art TVs in the comfort of this traditional sportsbook. Superbook Sports is known for better odds, favorable pricing, and an extensive wagering menu focusing on your Colorado teams. Now the Lodge Casino is your first place for fun and for sports. Have a gambling problem? Call 1-800-522-4700 for help. Welcome to the Believe in Broncos podcast. I am your host, Troy Rink from Denver 7, and it's another toasty summer day, record-breaking heat in the Denver metro area, so I hope you're all staying cool out there, staying hydrated. It just gives me another excuse to avoid chores like mowing the lawn, trimming trees and bushes, all stuff that I am terrible at, but are a necessity at times. But with this heat, I get a break from that. And I have more time to do my podcast in the air-conditioned office of my home. And let's go down the topics today. Number one topic, are we still talking about this? Really? I'll get to that in a second. Then I also want to mention a huge award for the Broncos regarding their community involvement. And finally, the bulk of this pod will be Nick Kosmider and I breaking down the Broncos off-season, what we learned, and looking forward to training camp. I've known Nick for several years when he first started covering the Rockies. My good friend Thomas Harding. Nick then did some hoops, covered a lot of Nuggets, and then he returned to the NFL beat with the Broncos for the Athletics. So looking forward to that. I know you guys will enjoy Nick and I chopping it up on what we've seen from these Broncos over the last couple of months. But the first topic is simple. Are we really talking about this? The Broncos were given a field day on Thursday by Coach Vic Fangio. I know, based on my reporting, it was in the works. Fangio was asked about it on Wednesday, and he said no, they were still planning on having practice, but I was told he wanted to surprise them, and he did at their Thursday morning meeting, that instead of practicing, they would have a field day. This would involve three-point shooting contest, home run derby, things of that nature, a dunk take to take out your frustration, and those kind of things. And I really don't understand why members of the media find this offensive and are somehow bothered by this. And I say this for two things. One, the offseason in football is so different. This isn't taking a training camp practice off. It's a mandatory minicamp practice off. Could you get work done that day? Yes, but it's built in where that extra work was done throughout this process to allow for this off day. It is also, as someone who's coached kids from ages 6 through 18 in multiple sports, including football, basketball, and baseball. Certainly baseball, I coached for 15 years. There are times as a coach, you know the pulse of your players, and you know that you want to give them a reward. Kind of humanize yourself, but also give them a chance to bond, have a little fun at the facility, and it's a reward for hard work. Now, if they've had an awful off season, then you say, you know what, you don't deserve this. We're going to practice to the last minute, and then you can go off to your parts unknown for the next 5-6 weeks before training camp begins on July 27th. But this is something that Vic Fangio did 2 years ago. I made light of it, and you can see on my Twitter feed at Troy Rink. I had my own personal field day in 2019, where, if memory serves, I won the closest to the pin contest, my own home run derby, and I gave myself a trophy. I kid because I care. A coach knows the pulse of his team. This is a reward. These practices are essentially, if you take out stretching, they're about an hour. It's not like Vic Fangio said, we are going to have an 8-hour workday today, and then now we're going to go a no day, not even a half day. It is a reward. I trust that he knows the pulse of his players. He knows what the practices have looked like. You give him that carrot at the end of all this. It reminds them that, hey, Coach knows, he sees us working hard. This sends us into the offseason, a nice bonding activity, go into the offseason, come back, ready for training camp. I don't see why there is a single issue with this. I don't want to hear about the record. haven't done well the last 5 years. Trust me, I know. I've covered every one of these games since they've missed the playoffs for 5 straight years. I've covered the 4 straight losing seasons. For the first time this has happened since 63 to 1972. But one more hour mandatory minicamp practice is not going to determine whether this team has a winning season or goes to the playoffs. I am all for the field day. I've seen what it can do for camaraderie, for relationships, a little bit of bond building, but before you leave to, again, parts unknown for 6 weeks. So I have no problem with that. The Broncos off the field received a huge nomination. I'll talk about that after the break. My show is presented in part by Hoggett Injury Law. With us, it's personal. Speaking of personal, let me tell you about my friend Darby Hoggett. I've known Darby for about a decade, coached his son in travel baseball. We used to hang out at games, talk about sports, especially the Denver Broncos. He's a big fan. We have become good friends. In fact, many of his clients have become his good friends. You don't even have to pay Darby up front. If your case goes as planned, Darby will be the one writing checks to you. If you've been hurt in a car wreck or injured at work, give his team a call at 1-833-HOGGET. That's 1-833-HOGGATT. Or find out more, visit their website at www.hoggettlaw.com. For the second consecutive year, the Broncos were named a finalist for ESPN's 2021 Sports Humanitarian of the Year Award. That was announced this week. Again, they were nominated also the previous year. And what a nomination. And this is a credit to the community work the Broncos do. And if you've... Let me take two. Welcome back to the program. I am your host, Troy Rink from Denver 7. And about that award the Broncos were nominated for. This is an award you don't strive for. You don't do community work to get awards. But the Broncos have been so good at it, they've been recognized for the second consecutive year. They have been named a finalist for ESPN's Sports Humanitarian of the Year Award. That was announced on Thursday. It's given to a sports franchise that demonstrates how teamwork can create a measurable impact on a community or a cause. The Broncos are a finalist for the second consecutive year. They joined the Atlanta Dream of the WNBA, the New York City Football Club of Soccer, and the Toronto Blue Jays as nominees. Again, the Broncos were nominated last year as well, and they do countless hours of community service, work in the community. I was just at a community event. They held the March for Peace around the Mount Bello neighborhood, starting at the Boys and Girls Club, to bring attention to the good things that can happen in that neighborhood. So you don't just see that neighborhood when it's something revolving, in a murder or a crime. There's a lot of good going on in that community, and those kind of events happen throughout the year with the Broncos. And this was a challenging year for them because they did a lot of these community events, as you know, via Zoom. And then as the restrictions were lifted, you saw guys going to food kitchens, to homeless shelters. Justin Simmons does amazing work with his foundation. Brandon McManus, Dalton Reisner, Tim Patrick. I mean, over 96 Broncos participated in a community event last year, where resulted in the nomination for this award. And I talked to Ali Engelken, the executive director of Broncos Community Development, and they're honored. And her sense is just a sense of pride, a pride in the work they do off the field. It does matter to them. And I know some roll their eyes at this, and all they care about is the on-field product. I understand where some people come from. In this case, I'm telling you, the last 5 years covering this team, I've never seen a franchise more involved in the off-field activities in the community as the Broncos. And that goes back to the days of Chris Harris, Broncos like that, through Justin Simmons. And again, now the Dalton Reisners of the world, even Quinn Miners has already done stuff in the community and his own community back in Wisconsin. So congratulations to the Broncos for being nominated for the second consecutive year for the ESPN's Humanitarian Team Award. So, well, good luck. They will find out on July 24th if they have won that award. Again, they are a nominee along with a couple other teams. So we'll see how it turns out for the Broncos. When we come up after the break, I tell you who the guest is going to be on my podcast. And you get an idea of someone I like chopping it up with, known this guy for years. But first, are you hungry? Feeling hungry? Well, how about some Moink meat? It is delicious. Just check out the reviews on this product. Join the Moink movement today. Go to moinkbox.com/believe, BLEAV, right now. And listeners to my show get free bacon for a year with every box ordered. That's 1 year of the best bacon you'll ever taste, but it's for a limited time. It's spelled Moink, MOINK, box.com/believe, BLEAV. That's moinkbox.com/believe. Welcome back to the Believe in Broncos podcast. I am your host, Troy Renck from Denver 7, and it is my pleasure now to be joined by Nick Kosmider from The Athletic. We go to this interview. I hope you enjoy it. Nick and I chopping it up, talking about the Broncos offseason, how to look, who jumped out to us, and what lies ahead. Can this team finally turn the corner and return to relevance? Welcome back to the Believe in Broncos podcast. I'm your host, Troy Renck from Denver 7. I am joined by my man, Nick Kosmider. Nick, how the heck are you?
I'm great, Troy, man. It's good to be with you. It feels full circle a little bit to be doing this with you.
Yeah, Nick is at The Athletic. You check out his stuff there. He does amazing work, especially some of the long form journalism you don't see as much anymore. His Kendall Hinton story, for one, was one of the best ones I read all last year, and the Drew Lock story on his recruiting as a basketball player. Nick tweeted that out today. Definitely follow Nick at The Athletic. But it's weird because you and I are covering football now, Nick, and most people, or many, know you from basketball, and I met you when you were covering baseball.
I know, and I was just thinking about this, that it's been 10 years. I met you in 2011. I was an intern with MajorLeagueBaseball.com, working with Thomas Harding over there, covering Rockies. I was straight out of college. And yeah, that's where you and I met. And it's wild just to kind of see how those paths sort of wind to kind of end up in this same place, covering the Broncos all these years later. It's pretty cool. It's to that's just the way the careers go here, I guess.
Yeah. What do you remember about working with my man Thomas Harding? He is at times the funniest, confusing, honest, happiest. He's all these emotions in one. I miss Thomas. One of the reasons I miss covering baseball is just sitting in the press box, the banter he and I used to have. I still, to this day, I miss it. What do you remember about working with Thomas?
Yeah, I mean, to have that be your first sort of experience covering professional sports. I was so lucky to have him because, he's this guy that he's disarming in the way that like he is, just kind of goofy and fun. And I think that you saw how that like played not only in the locker room, but just among his colleagues, which as you go longer in this business, you realize how important that is too. But also just, but then like he could turn that all around and be a really good kind of, mentor. He's a sharp writer it's like you said, kind of just hits all those boxes of learning different ways to navigate the business, because that's as much a part of it as you're writing and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, he's great, man. All of his one-liners, some of them have escaped me at this point, but he's a great guy to sort of learn from.
His favorite thing was feeling fresh, feeling clean.
Feeling fresh, feeling clean. Yep. As if he had just gotten out of the shower every time he saw him.
Yeah, it was because of a track meet he covered, or somebody saw in track is where he got that saying. Like, a track athlete was interviewed after, how you feeling? He's like, feeling fresh, feeling clean. That became Tim.
Oh, is that the origin of it? Okay. See, I never heard the origin of it.
Yeah, and one of his email addresses was based on a park in a city he lived in. Of course, it was an AOL address. If you know Thomas, that's perfectly fitting.
Right. The other line I remember is when he would describe food in like press boxes as perfectly edible. That was another one. When he did eat, sometimes he'd bring his own lunch or whatever, but I always thought that was funny too.
Thomas, going to a restaurant with Thomas was one of my favorite experiences. And anytime a waiter or waitress would come up with no notepad, I'd be like, listen, I don't know if that's your thing, but you got no chance. Because he'd be like, I want water, no lemon. Do you have lemon? Yeah. What about carrots? Do you have carrots? Yeah, we do. I don't want carrots. He would go through the list of things he didn't want and tell him not to include those to the point where the eyes would just glaze over. And I would literally, so anytime he would finish ordering, I would literally be like, I'll just get a salad and a hamburger, like whatever the most basic, whatever the special was, I want that because I want a chance that my order's right. His had zero chance of being right every time we went out.
You were gonna have a modification or two, but then after that, you're just like, okay, just give me the like plain burger or whatever.
Nothing on it and salad. I don't even need dressing. Just give me a fork. I'll eat like a rabbit. Well, you go on from that. You ended up at Texas Tech in Lubbock covering hoops. So you do that? Talk to our listeners a little bit about that and how you ended up back in Colorado.
Yeah, I think so. Just the kind of as it was when I finished that internship, it was just sort of that cast a wide net and see what you can get out there. And, it's kind of interesting just how like the different, every employer might be looking for some different thing in your past. And it turned out that at Texas, the newspaper there, the Lubbock Avalanche Journal, they had seen that I had worked for Rivals for a brief period of time when I was in college. But the funny thing about that is that they kind of viewed it as like, oh, you know how to cover recruiting, which, that's newspapers were getting beat pretty bad by these upstart companies and we're trying to figure out a way to do it. But I hadn't really covered recruiting. I really just covered like ASU or whatever. But I just said, yeah, I know how to, do that or whatever. And, so you just kind of learn on the job. And I spent 18 months out there. I covered the university's basketball team and eventually the football team right when Cliff Kingsbury got hired. Was sort of like the end of my time there. I want to say spring of 2013. And I just left because my now wife, her and I had been dating long distance and I just wanted to move back. I had loved it here when I interned. I have some family here and I was just kind of like taking a leap of faith that I would be able to find something. And I don't know if you remember this, but you were actually the one that said, hey, they have this spot at the Post. It's for like a part-time agate clerk. So it's like, it's below what you've been doing. Like it's definitely like not like the end all, but get in, put your foot in the door and, and then just kind of do your thing. And that's how it worked. I started at the Post in June or July of 2013. For about 2 or 3 years, I was doing that, doing the agate, doing the desk stuff at night and then like writing it whenever I could, whenever they would give me a chance to do that. And eventually got a full-time writing job there. And, did that for 2 years, covered Rockies, CU football, and then eventually the Nuggets, and then the Broncos for 2017, Vance Joseph's first season. And and then started at the Athletic in 2018. So yeah, it's, and that's kind of the thing I always say is just take something. If you believe in your kind of your ability, your work ethic, you'll make it, for yourself. But it's kind of just wild how it worked out.
Yeah, I don't recommend many people, I'll be honest, because some of I like, but I just don't see the work ethic. And when I saw you on the baseball beat, I knew you could do it. Like if you can do the baseball beat, you can do almost any beat because you can't fake it. Like because it's a daily grind. And I remember when Torrin Berge asked me about that, I'm like, I got a guy. I mean, he's been a beat writer, so this isn't ideal, but I know eventually he could help us, and he would do great work. And I was so happy to see not only got on, but eventually you were writing. And that's led us to this point where we're covering the Broncos and their marvelous quarterback situation. A lot of success we've had here last few years. But Nick, we go to the end of OTAs and mandatory minicamp today. What are some of your takeaways as you've seen this team now? We saw them basically 5 media viewing periods. And what are some of your takeaways, starting with the quarterback between Teddy, 2 gloves, Bridgewater, and Drew, one sleeve lock?
Well, it always has to start there, of course. And I start with Drew just as sort of the incumbent. I'll kind of go there. And what I wrote today, just as this was wrapping up, is, look, what happens when at the end of July until the start of the season, that's where that's gonna be his audition, right? Vic Fangio threw out 2 to 3%. I don't know how you quantify how much you're really evaluating, but I think the whole point was like there's a lot of this to go, and the Broncos, whether you agree with this or not, they're gonna do this sort of 50-50 down the middle training camp battle. I think there are some cons to that might outweigh some of the pros, but that's where they're going. That's how they're doing it. And so that's where Drew Lock's audition will be. And so my thing today was, I think when you look back at it from the end of last season, kind of the way that he closed the last couple games, sort of the ownership I think he took for some of the failings that he contributed to the offense's overall failings, and just the way that he handled that, the way that sort of he didn't kind of say anything, didn't make any kind of noise as they started to explore other quarterback options very publicly, of course. And then when we kind of come to find out the way that he did approach the offseason, this, 3 times a day film study, this getting up early, this very regimented thing. And my takeaway was, listen, it's not that he was not taking the job seriously last year. It's not that he didn't have the work ethic, but my takeaway from it was pretty clearly he learned that there was another level that he didn't, I think, realize that you had to be if you wanted to be a successful starting NFL quarterback. And so at the end of the day, I think what we saw, even though his performances during those 5 practices we saw certainly weren't perfect by any stretch, but I just think the overall approach and sort of the overall kind of professionalism from him, you can see it in talking to people and just kind of observing what we have been able to observe at this point. That was kind of my big takeaway of like, he's checked those boxes. Will it mean anything come July? We'll have to wait and find out, but I think he's put his best foot forward so far.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Nick, that when you're the quarterback of an NFL team now, you're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and you have to eat it, sleep it, breathe it. It's a different level of commitment. And it's not across the board. If you're a linebacker or a cornerback, you invest in your body and you work out. But when you're the quarterback of an NFL team, you're in front of the camera more than most. You define their image more than most. And Locke worked hard the previous offseason. I mean, with OTAs, it was a little bit clearly interrupted and clumsy and clunky, but he worked hard. But you pointed out perfectly is that it's a different level of commitment. It is almost maniacal, frankly, and how these top quarterbacks treat the position, whether it's Russell Wilson, Tom Brady, Drew Brees, Peyton Manning. And I think Drew, we've seen that where you say he's taken ownership, and he's also said, this is kind of who I want to be. I want to make this my life now. I get it. And, and I see it's paid some dividends. It's really, for me, he's got to be consistent. I put everything back to baseball. On Tuesday, he had a day where he's like 3 for 4 with a 2-run home run and game-winning RBI late in the game. And then the next day he has a pick 6, and it wasn't terrible, but he's got to find a way because his ceiling's higher than Teddy. And I'm going to ask you this, but Teddy's floor is a lot higher than Drew. And that's somewhere they got to find a quarterback in between that. So I'll go then next to that is, what have you seen from Teddy? It's our first time seeing him. Certainly he's got more of a track record than Drew. He's been in the league longer. What are your impressions from seeing Teddy?
Well, I think I saw something you wrote or put on Twitter said calmer than a lagoon, and I thought that was a pretty accurate way to assess him. I've really enjoyed like I think twice now we've talked to him, and the way that I kind of thought of it is Teddy is a guy that you're going to want to be around him when he's 60, like sitting on the porch just telling stories, because he is just this most like calm, good storyteller, just sort of like smile on his face. He's not disturbed by anything. I mean, here's a guy who, signed the big deal with Carolina last year. That this was kind of his big chance after the really solid stint as a backup in New Orleans with that 5-0 record while Drew Brees was out. He's a guy that got signed by the Jets and then sent away before he even got a chance to play after they drafted Darnold, who, oh, by the way, is the guy that he lost his job. I mean, and yet all these things have happened. And, we don't know the conversations or whatever frustrations he might hold that he shares with, privately. But I just think in a competition now that he's going to have, A, he's done it before, but B, just his overall demeanor is going to serve him well, because he's not going to have these situations where he has a couple bad days or he has a bad day and a half, and he just kind of goes into the tank. That's not what he's going to do. And I think we've already kind of seen that if, a couple overthrows here or there, and it really doesn't bother him. He continues to kind of come at it. Nothing spectacular. And I don't sense that he's kind of the guy that you would see in training camp anyway that's going to just wow you. But certainly I think he's well equipped for this situation, just given his demeanor.
Yeah, can boring be beautiful? I mean, I like Teddy the person. I've talked to former teammates of his. They love the guy. And you can see why, like you said, he could see him sitting on a porch telling a story. He's a guy you want in a foxhole with you. In terms of leadership, he checks every box, and he does have a calming presence when I talk to players about him. Again, ball security with him is job security. And can he be a better version of Case Keenum? Because when Case was here, Case basically threw those 3 picks in the opener that first season with Denver. He stopped throwing interceptions and he stopped taking chances. He just stopped taking any chances. He never threw touchdowns as well. So, but and we'll keep an eye on Aaron Rodgers. How intrigued are you by the Rodgers story? I'm for one, like, until it's a non-story, it's a story. I'm not writing about it every day, but it's very clear to me that Aaron Rodgers is dug in here. So how do you see the Aaron Rodgers story? How does that shape your coverage?
Well, I'll start with how it shapes my personal life. Is that you tell, I'm taking next week off, right? I had, helped cover the Nuggets during this basketball round. We just got done with all this stuff, the draft. So I'm going to take a week off here, starting on Monday. And but all that caveat, of course, is I told my wife, like, we can go places, but I can't go anywhere where I don't have cell phone reception because, if this is to break, it's something that you have to be prepared for. The way that I approach it coverage wise was, listen, and I'm with you, like, he's out there. He's saying he doesn't want to play for Green Bay. He didn't show up to mandatory minicamp. There's no sign that this is getting resolved anytime soon. And so, like, it's definitely a story. It's definitely a possibility. Denver is one of a handful of teams that has the necessary salary cap, the necessary young players that would be part of a deal. And so they would be in the mix, and that's the bottom line. And so it's a situation where, I'm not writing about it every day. I'm approaching it as, listen, these are the quarterbacks on their roster. We're going to write about this battle, but it's definitely something that is a part of the grander scheme. To me, it's just like, you have to have it on the back burner at all times. You're waking up every morning saying, did it happen at 3 a.m. and I missed it? It's
right.
It's the way it goes here on this beat. Even when the Broncos aren't winning, they're never not, like, interesting. They're never not in on something. So, how do you view it?
Yeah, I mean, the Rodgers thing for me, it's intriguing because you have a GM saying he would be nimble and he's in on every deal. He knows everybody and they have a need. They have salary cap space. They could accommodate a trade through the draft picks. It would hurt. They'd probably have to give up a player like a Jerry Jeudy, someone you'd hate to see go. But, I mean, there's no untouchables. You can't have them all, but there's no untouchables.
Right.
Would the Packers just get really petty and say, fine, sit out the season, and there's going to be a greater market for you next year? Maybe. I mean, there would be a greater market, but he'd also be 38 sitting out a season. I think there'd be a greater number of teams, but there would be fewer picks going back. So instead of 2 1s, 2 2s, and a player, it'd be more like 2 1s, 1 2, and maybe not even a player. I think the package would change. But as we focus on it, that means maybe Deshaun Watson will come back into the picture if his legal issues get resolved. That's the other one, too. I mean, again, that one I'm not as comfortable with. If I'm the Broncos, I would have to vet that in ways because they've done so many good things off the field, promoting women to the highest level of their football operations. You could have a woman owner in Brittany Bolin. I would have to be very comfortable with Deshaun Watson. But that's the one I would literally, when it was available, if he were, I would give up almost anything because he's 26. Rodgers' age, I think, changes the compensation package if he were to sit out a year. I don't think he does. I think they trade him like in late August or September. Like they put him in a tough position where he just joins the team like 7 days before the first game. That's what I think is going to happen.
I still think that Aaron Rodgers is going to play for the Packers next year, and maybe that's naive because certainly the back and forth hasn't pointed in that direction. But I just think that they're going to put together a contract that he wants. They'll make amends, and it's look, he's been there forever, and they probably are right now still his best chance of winning another title. Now, if he were to come here and then they didn't have to give up too much that really like damage, because if you say, hey, we'll give you Aaron Rodgers, but we want Jerry Jeudy, Noah Fant, Javonte Williams, like all of a sudden you're like, well, what am I gonna work with? Right, but Yeah, I mean, and I could definitely be missing the mark on this. I just ultimately think they're going to find a way to get it done, and bring him back and make that amends. But certainly won't be stunning if that isn't the case.
So you're saying they're gonna avoid the divorce and stay together for the kids for one more year? I'm not sure about that.
Stay together. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's not, like I said, it's nothing more for me than like just kind of a gut thing, because I mean, it certainly isn't pointing in that direction. I mean, they're just in, I mean, the pettiness, like he's wearing a t-shirt that says "I'm offended," based on, Mark Murphy, calling him a complicated fellow, or at least we think that's what the connection is. I'm interested to see what's going to come out of the match when they're mic'd up in that thing.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just all petty.
Yeah, I agree. It's fascinating. It makes for interesting fodder between now and training camp. Well, what are some of the other things that jumped out? Who are, when you look at what you've seen these 5 weeks, let's look at what are one or two players or things you saw, Nick, that are encouraging for Broncos country. Reasons for optimism when there's been, as we know, 5 years without the playoffs, 4 straight losing seasons for the first time in decades. What do you see as reasons for optimism when you were out there?
Well, I just think this secondary is going to be nails. It's hard for me to think that group is not going to be really good, barring, of course, injury. And because, Kyle Fuller missed the majority of the offseason program. I think he show up the week before mandatory minicamp began. Yeah. And one of his first plays in team, pass across the middle, he closes on it, knocks the pass down. Patrick Surtain II has looked really, really good. I think, obviously the requisite size, they've been using him in all kinds of different, places on the field. I really think he's going to kind of be, they're going to try to use him as a Swiss Army knife even more, I think, than Alabama did, because, Alabama just didn't need to. So you add that, I think, Justin Simmons has looked, as sharp as he did to end last season. I think he's been really good. It's just a group that I think is really, really deep to where they can survive an injury or two, which they didn't have the benefit of last year. So, and you asked Vic about what that does for him. He says, we're going to be able to play a little bit more press man coverage. And if they do that well, we know very well what that can do, right? That could be, I think, the real key to fixing this turnover problem, where Denver's defense, as good as it is, has been near the bottom of the forced turnover category in the league the last 2 years. So much of that has to do with the fact that they're playing from behind and teams.
Right. They had 16 takeaways, Nick, last year. Simmons had 6, and they had 4 in the last game. Like, to me, if they don't have 11, if they need 15 picks, 25 takeaways. Part of that is, can we please have a functional offense? But don't you think 15 picks is realistic with this secondary?
Yeah, it should be. It absolutely should be, because you go to the front line and you expect that pass rush to be better. I think Vaughn is a big mystery. I really don't know. Can he get back to what they were convinced last year? And I think any of us who got to see him in training camp kind of carried that same view, that he was ready to kind of put that, poor by his standard 2019 season behind him, that he was going to bounce back, double-digit sacks, all pro kind of performance. And he looked the part. He certainly had the attitude. I think it'll be interesting to see come the end of July, just sort of how he looks, what his mindset is, and whether he can be that guy. But if he is, then to kind of get back to that point, Malik Reed led the team in sacks last year. Bradley Chubb was a Pro Bowler, kind of in a watered down year, but was a Pro Bowler, another year removed from his ACL. So that's a group you say there's no reason to think, especially when you talk about the interior, then Shelby Harris, Draymond Jones is just going to be better this year. So there's, I think, a lot of optimism there that the parts, that's, as you know so well, the 2015 defense, what made them so good is kind of all those parts kind of coming together. They actually have to do it. This team does. But I think on paper and sort of the early signs are that they can have that thing that meshes, where having that front of the line do its job and the secondary kind of doing the same thing on the back end. They just kind of it's a perfect marriage. That to me is sort of the ceiling. That's sort of the optimist, the half glass full view. But I think we've seen little kernels of that so far that could be the situation for them. What's been where do you kind of start when you kind of step back and examine the last 5 weeks?
Well, I mean, clearly they're defensively they have a chance to be special, but only if their offense gives them a chance to be special. By that I mean play even or play with the lead. I looked up over the last 2 years, they're 1-15 when trailing at halftime. I mean, and that just eliminates chances for sacks and takeaways. And I saw this even when Chris Harris was still there, and you had Vaughn, but their best players were non-factors because they were trailing. And because it's 3rd and 8, and the other team's on its own 28-yard line, they're up 17-7 in middle of the fourth quarter. They're gonna run the football. How many shots is Vaughn getting? They may pass 34 times. Of that, like 3 to 4 are really good sack opportunities, and that's why. But we saw in that Jets game last year, Jets are desperate. They're trying to win. All of a sudden, Bradley Chubb looks like the best player on the field. That's where a functional offense, meaning playing even, heck, even have a lead once in a while. That's where this defense could be special. I think Vic is going to be creative with the defense. My optimism is certainly tempered by the quarterback situation, but one guy I'm bullish on is Jerry Jeudy. And I've been ride or die with Jeudy because of his talent. I've said he's better in space than NASA. This guy gets it done. And if he just eliminates the drops, and Nick, that's what, when you ask me, what do I see? I haven't seen him have a drop in 5 viewing periods. I'm not saying it hasn't happened, but Jeudy took it personally. And that's what second, when a guy as a superstar struggles, and you've covered so many different athletes in sports, do they pout? Do they make excuses? Do they blame people? Or do they just take ownership and say, this is on me? And that's what I've seen from Jeudy. What have you seen from Jeudy? And what do you see from that offense that jumps to you, aside from the quarterbacks?
Yeah, no, I think absolutely. I mean, he has been hands down the star of the 5 practices they've seen. Those probably adds up to 6-7 hours of on-field time. I mean, just completely locked in June, and he's been the favorite target of either quarterback if he's on the field while they're throwing. Vic has said this multiple times. I thought that it was interesting that he said it really even in the aftermath of that terrible game against the Chargers in Los Angeles, where I think the official record was 6 drops, and says, listen, this can be a turning point moment in his career. And he has a lot of career left to know that's true, but the fact that he had 5 for 140 and a 92-yard touchdown in that last game, you couldn't have asked for, I think, a better way to end it. And it does, I think we talked about this the other day, how much can you really catapult a week 17 game in the middle of January or beginning part of January all the way to September? But I just do think for his, just kind of overall approach, he has been, absolutely locked in. And if you look at that, I think 2 of the drops were in that opener, 2 really bad ones that had he made another one, they win that game because they run out the clock. I was going back over that game the other day, looking up something, and I ended up watching the last half of the fourth quarter. I still don't comprehend how they lost that game. The situations that they had, the advantageous clock situations that they had, to where all you need to do is make 1 first down or get one, a million things could have happened differently that they could have won it.
Or your coach could have called a timeout.
Coach could have called a timeout. All that could have worked too. But anyway, so you had that game, and then the week 15 game, he wasn't perfect, obviously, in between those 2. But I think that certainly, I think the fact that so many were in that one game at the end of the season, it was on it. I do think that exasperated some of it about just how much he did drop the ball. He had his issues, of course, but as long as he cleans that up, I think there's very little doubt that he's going to be fantastic. The only really other takeaway that I have offensively is I am just curious about how the offensive line will ultimately shake out. I'm curious what you think about this. They're saying that Lloyd Cushenberry and Quinn Miners are in a battle for that center spot. I'd be really surprised if that truly is a camp battle that Cushenberry is not going to win. Vic said his biggest thing, he needed to get bigger. And we saw that early in the year. He got pushed around a lot. That was a big part of his problem. But I think just as you're trying to get continuity overall, you just did the thing where you had a rookie center, dealing with all that. Do you really want to go back to that? Well, I'm kind of curious your thought on how the kind of that will shake up or anything else on the line.
Well, I thought before they drafted Miners, they were going to move Glasgow to center and put Mute at guard because
Yeah.
Cushenberry, great guy, smart kid, the work ethic's there. He got pushed around, as you mentioned, those first 8 games. I mean, he ranked essentially as the worst center in football if you take Pro Football Focus with a grain of salt. But they do the homework and they do watch the film. They don't know assignments, so it gets tricky, but you can see that he did struggle the first 8 games, and that really affected his overall grade for the season. But he's put on weight. He's taken personally. He's taken ownership of his failures. I just don't see a scenario where Miners, who's never played center in a game, I don't think at any level, I just don't see him doing it. And he's coming from Division III to go from never playing center, Division III, missing all of last season and starting an NFL game. If that were to happen, it would be later in the season. If Cushenberry were to struggle or maybe rolls an ankle or something, I don't see it. They need Glasgow to play better, honestly, based on his contract. I mean, I'm not saying he gets a free pass, but he got $26 million guaranteed. I mean, we rip on Juwan James. I got along with James personally, but I mean, he was 63 snaps for whatever it was, 17 million. I get why fans are furious with the guy, but Glasgow wasn't very good last year in terms of the money. I mean, and that does fit part of it. So he's got to be better. I think Reisner's shoulder bothered him more than he would ever let on, and he struggled at times. So healthy Reisner, Glass now in the system for second year, and and then you've got Cushenberry improving. But right tackle, I've said this. I mean, the right tackle position of this team is like Spinal Tap to drummers. Can we get a guy, Nick? Can we get one guy that just plays it for 12 games?
Can you finish one tour? Can you finish one tour with us before we have to replace the drummer?
One tour, but we come walking out to the little Cleveland. No, man, we're not in Cleveland. Where are we? But who do you like at right tackle? I mean,
I really don't know, just simply because we haven't seen Bobby Massey out there. Not that we would gain a whole lot, I think, from offensive line play during OTAs,
right?
But I think they brought him in here to be that guy. Has the experience. You do worry that he's missed, I believe it's 14 games over the last 2 years combined, or 12 to 14, somewhere in that range. So you worry about that a little bit. Obviously, he's getting up there a little bit in terms of his career longevity. But I think all things equal, all people healthy, that should be their guy. But it definitely does look like, to me, the question isn't who's going to start right tackle. It's how many guys are going to have to play there. Because that's been the story last year. You had starts by Elijah Wilkinson, DeMar Dotson, Calvin Anderson started right tackle. Jake Rogers didn't make a start there. I don't believe, but
he did. I think the year before. I think
it was the year before, right? So they had the 3 starters there. I think I put it in a story that I wrote the other day. I think it's six in the last 2 years alone have started at right tackle. I mean, that's just too many players to shuffle into that to expect to have any continuity. One thing that this narrative that, there certainly were a lot less penalties. I was stunned by this. I looked it up that in 2019, there were 23 tackles who had at least 5 holding calls against them. In 2020, there were only 5 that had that number, that had at least 5, and it was only 5. Like they didn't have 6 or 7 or 8. So there was a drastic reduction in the amount of holding calls. Now, was that an emphasis of the league? Was that, because no fans in the stadium, tackles were able to kind of hear and communicate better? Whatever the question, whatever it is that it might be. But I don't worry about that with Garrett Bowles, that his ability to kind of drastically reduce his penalties was a function of, just the league calling less of them or crowd noise, because, just the way that he closed 2019, he had figured that out. And then when you pair that with what he did in 2020, that gives additional context. Like that goes to show you that that's really where the light bulb started to turn. So to me, you have a breakthrough season, you got to follow it up. That's an important part of it. But I don't really worry about Garrett Bowles having any kind of regression. I think this is who he is. And so
if they're going to be any good at all, like 9-8, 10-7, their stars have to be stars. If he has a regression, I mean, they are in huge trouble. I don't see it because he did benefit from the league de-emphasizing holding calls, especially away from the ball. But when you watched how he got holding calls before, last year we didn't see that extra, throwing a guy when the running back's 10 yards. The way he got holding calls, he eliminated some of that. So to your point, where how he played at the end of 19 and 20, now the crowd's going to be a factor. It is always is, especially on the road, obviously. But I don't think there'll be an issue with Bulls. He's there's a maturity there that is developed, and he frankly, if their stars have to be stars, or they have no chance. And that
well, Bulls reminds me a little bit of, it's kind of a funny comparison to make because of the way that his season just ended. But Nikola Jokic early in his career was, that was his Achilles heel, that he would at times allow his emotion to kind of like completely take him out of his game that was otherwise, there was no question about his game. It was always going to be solid. And he worked hard, like from the maturity angle, to just really like thicken his skin year after year. He got better at handling those situations. Of course, the timing, of course, is that he gets ejected from the final game of his MVP season because he made an emotional call. Whether he should have been ejected, that's up for debate. But he certainly made an emotional decision to slap Cameron Payne, just to slap the ball really hard and hit Cameron Payne. But that's what I see with Bulls as well. Like you're absolutely right. Like the stuff that this guy got under your skin, or he hit you a little bit late, and you turn that into a frustration that kind of got away from you. He still gets heated. I think it was after that Jets game when, that last like minute took an hour.
That got ugly. Yeah.
And he was, he was one of the first guys up there. So he hasn't lost that edge, but I just think that he's done a better job harnessing it. And you're right. He'll need to have another season just like last year.
Well, you said, Jokic got tossed. I'm pretty sure if that had been LeBron, they would have thrown out Payne for his face getting in the way of LeBron's fist. Right? I mean, they would have been like, Payne, you're out.
You're trying to suggest some sort of like, star big market bias in the NBA? No way.
So and I'm joined by Nick Kosmider from The Athletic. I've known Nick for years. I guess it has been 10 years. I didn't realize, man, I'm old. I'm really old. I got one son's graduated college. Another one's going to be graduating soon. So I'm old, and you're a first-time father. I'm so happy for you and your family. I can't think of someone to be a better dad, but I'm spinning off onto that. You still have habits, and one of them is your sneaker habit. You're a sneakerhead. Tell people, how'd you get into it, and what is your favorite pair? You were wearing a pair of Adidas that had Legos in them at training camp or whatever we're at, OTAs. I mean, your sneaker game is on point. Where did this come from, and how many pairs? What's your favorite? You got to let us know.
Yeah, I was just always, I grew up, like basketball was my thing growing up, and I think that my first, I think, pair of sneakers that I really remember was the Shaq Gnosis ones. Remember the Shaq had that shoe that was like, it looked like a time glass. It was like the white and the black stripes. And so I was just like, I just kind of got hooked by the culture of it all. Of course, now that I wouldn't be caught dead in that shoe because it's terrible, but that was sort of how it started. And then, just always kind of being a Jordan fan and collecting it. I'll show you, your listeners won't see this because it's not video, but this is the first thing I put up in
nice, in the new house here, right?
Yeah. My wife is like, you get to do The Office. It's basically a poster. It's called a visual, just sort of a chart of all these like sneakers, and I'd not definitely have this, but you can see this is the, I probably can't point the camera to it. Oh yeah, but yeah, there's the Shaq shoe I was talking about. But the Shaq Gnosis, that's what it was called. But yeah, it's just something like, it's always been a hobby of mine. I was telling Jeff Legwald, the Broncos ESPN reporter, the other day, because he was giving me a hard time about it. But definitely, I'm sure you knew this too. When you had kids, like your hobbies tend to take a back seat. So I've definitely been like pumping the brakes on it quite a bit. The Lego ones that you were actually sitting right here.
Those are fantastic. Those are fantastic.
Yeah, so those are a gift. But I've otherwise tried to temper. Now I just like I put it on. I put it on my son Camden. He's probably got 3 or 4 pairs of Jordans now. So
how old is he now?
He's 2. He turned 2 on May 1st. So
so he's already had Jordans, obviously.
Yeah, already has. We have one matching pair that we have that I try to rock as much as I can right now because I know he'll grow out of it in like a couple more months. But it's one of those things. You buy a new house and all of a sudden my habit is just going to turn into art. It's just going to now be like sneaker art, and that's what I can afford.
That's how we had kids. Like I stopped golfing. I stopped like buying music. Like it's just so many things in your life change, but you don't regret it because you're doing stuff for your kids. So you look up and you're just like. it's just such a different feeling when you're doing stuff for kids that any things you had before just kind of just dissolve naturally and you just kind of forget about it. But you got the poster and you got the shoes.
Yep. That's why I should have been professional. These professional athletes, they can, have their cake and eat it too. Their kids are flossed out and they still get to have all their hobbies. I guess that has its perks.
Well, Nick, it's been an absolute pleasure, man. It's one of the cool things. I know you love basketball, but bringing you back onto the beat when Nikki Javala, both a friend of ours who went to the Washington Post, that stunk to see her go, but a byproduct, and that was you rejoining the Broncos beat. I love having you around. I'm hoping we have a normal media room. I enjoy the camaraderie of the media room. I enjoy the debate and the banter. I mean, I don't really get along with everyone, but I just love the conversation. And certainly when you're around, you and I have similar interests in basically all the sports. Certainly baseball, basketball, and football.
Yeah.
So I can't wait to get back in that media room.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Looking forward to actually being on the road this year, which I know we both missed last year. It's you just want to be there. That's the best way to bring it to the fans. Is how you build the relationships. So it's going to be I think a lot better for those who consume the sport. I think it's trending in the right direction. The PFWA has done a good job. I think with what they have to try to get these protocols to be a little bit more favorable to to the media that's done their part, gotten vaccinated, and all that kind of stuff. So. Yeah, man, I'm ready for it. Ready for this break for the next week, but then we'll get right back at it.
Yeah, no trades. No
trades. Aaron, you stay in Green Bay or Hawaii or wherever we are. We'll just wait for that.
Nick, it's been a pleasure, my man. I'll see you hopefully in a few weeks. We got to sit down, have coffee, hang out now that every life's returning to normal.
Sounds great, Troy. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining me on the Believe in Broncos podcast. I am your host, Troy Renck. Thanks in large part to all of you who listen, the subscribers and those who are downloading. The support has been just fantastic through these first 7-8 weeks. I really appreciate it. It means a lot. Thanks to my guest, Nick Kosmider. Nick's a great guy. Read his stuff at The Athletic. He does not only the daily reporting, but gets into the in-depth stories. He did one on Kendall Hinton that was just fantastic. Another one on Drew Lock, where he looked at Drew's basketball ability. Nick has just done some amazing pieces, and you can find his work on The Athletic. Also like to thank my presenting sponsor, Superbook Sports. Again, they're going to have an opening of Superbook Sports at the Lodge Casino up there in Blackhawk on June 25th. Check that out if you have a chance. Thanks to Darby Hoggett as well, my friend. He's the first sponsor. This show would not have started if not for Darby's support. And finally, for my son, Dagan, thank you to him for producing this podcast and turning them around so quickly so we can get 2 out a week. Well, folks, again, I do this podcast for you and Broncos country. Happiness, that begins with me. Go out there and have a great day.